Motivation and Self-Discipline in Foreign Language Study. As the title clearly indicates, the subject matter of this lecture, as of all my lectures, is the area of foreign language learning. But I think that what I have to say about motivation and self-discipline might be of more general interest, and that in particular the specific suggestions that I will make a little bit later on for how to go about getting in the habit of doing just about anything on a systematic, regular basis might be of much more general application to other fields of study or other endeavors altogether, such as getting and staying fit by means of a regular exercise regimen, or learning how to play a musical instrument relatively well by systematic daily practice. I will certainly make reference to both of these fields and to others throughout. So I hope that if you landed here because of your interest in motivation, self-discipline, habit formation, you will stay around and hear me out, even if you're not particularly interested in foreign language learning. Let's begin by considering motivational dimensions. What are the rubrics under which we can consider motivation? I always like to put things in categories rather than just looking at specific individual instances. And in this consideration, I think that there are three main dimensions for motivation under which we can consider motivation. And the first one is the reasons for which we do something in the first place. This is the why, the big why. Why do we do something? Do we do something because other people make us do it, or other people expect us to do it, or because we ourselves want to do it? And if we want or choose to do something, do we do it simply because we like it, we find it interesting, or because we think it's good for us, or because we hope to get something out of it? All of these are the reasons, the whys for which we do something. And the next aspect, motivational dimension, are the goals. These are the whats, the specific things that we're trying to achieve or attain. Usually these might be something like a certain test score or a certain grade by a certain date, if we're trying to get through a certain exercise or a certain book, or if we're trying to do a certain number of repetitions or exercises or practices within a certain time limit. These are our goals. This is another aspect of motivation. And then finally, there is what I called here propulsion, but you could also call it energy or drive. This is the how. How do we go about doing something? Full of energy and enthusiasm and great interest and passion, or kind of struggling against our will, forcing ourselves, pushing ourselves along. Let's move on to consider each of these in more detail, beginning with motivation, considered as the reason for embarking upon the study of a foreign language. Under this rubric, I think that there are four main reasons, again, categories. We could enumerate lots of specific reasons, but four main categories. And the first one is external compulsion. This is when, in particular for foreign languages, when we study a language because we're made to do so. Somebody else decides that we have to do so, and so we do so. In the preceding film, looking at language acquisition, I talked about the fact that we don't get any choice in terms of our mother language, our native language, our first language, nor do we get any choice in terms of our second language or our school language. So it's probably not surprising that we often don't get any choice in our foreign language, our first foreign language. I think that this external compulsion is the most common reason for people studying languages, because languages are most commonly studied during the formal schooling process. In high school or in college, it's very common for there to be a language requirement. Often people are told you must learn this specific language, or maybe that you have to learn a language, and here's a choice. It's often a rather limited choice. You have to choose between language A, B, or C, but you must choose a language. So external compulsion is also known as extrinsic reason, extrinsic motivation in motivational psychology. And the other three kinds that I have here, in contrast to that, are known as intrinsic motivation because they come from within inside. It's the choice of the learner to engage in the activity. The first kind of these, the first intrinsic kind, the second one I have here, utilitarian need or practicality, is known in educational circles as instrumental orientation when it comes to learning a foreign language. This means that basically you use the language as a tool. You actively want to use it to communicate in a certain set of circumstances. You're going to go live or work or study in the country or interact with people from the country, and therefore you need the language. You want to use it as a tool. This is quite naturally, normally, understandably, probably the most common reason for which people undertake the study of foreign languages. The next one, personal or cultural affinity I have here, is known as integrative orientation in educational circles. And this is when you have some sort of again, affinity, a relationship with the language altogether, and you wish to deepen it. You wish to get to know it better and integrate yourself with the people and the culture that speak it. Under personal levels, the most common type here is what's probably called heritage learning. That is when you want to learn the language that your ancestors spoke, but that your grandparents or your parents didn't pass on to you. You can also feel some sort of personal affinity if you have a personal, say, romantic relationship with somebody from the culture or friends, or let's say you went traveling in the country and you particularly liked it and you would like to go back and integrate yourself more with it. You can also get the cultural affinity part just by reading books or watching movies or listening to music, somehow coming to really enjoy the products of a culture that uses a particular language, and by getting to know the language you'll get to know these, you'll appreciate the cultural products all the better. And then the fourth general reason for undertaking the study of foreign languages might be called intellectual interests, and these can be linguistic in cultural in orientation, or cultural, or philosophical. These are a bit more specialized, and I will talk a lot more about them at the end because I don't want to lose people who have just general interests, but I will talk more about them. These are my own main interests. So, considering these reasons, the more reasons we have for studying a language or for doing anything, the better. The more likely we are to maintain our reasons, so we can certainly have more than one, and our reasons can change and grow. I think that's normal for them to do that. Maybe that you start out being forced to learn a language, but you might come to like it or see the need for it yourself. As I said, the first two types, external compulsion and utilitarian need or practicality, instrumental orientation, are far and away the most common. So if you're a normal, average, typical language learner, you probably have one of these reasons, and there's nothing wrong with either of them. Any of these reasons here by itself can lead to success. External compulsion. Obviously, it's easier to do something if you want to than if other people are making you do it, but if others make you do it and you respect their authority and you're generally a good student and they have good reasons for making you do it and you come to internalize those reasons and they not only make you do it, but they give you the support network that you need to do it. In this case, they give you good language learning circumstances. This can lead to success. Certainly, utilitarian need or practicality, if that's real, that can see you through. But that said, as I noted in the previous film, success in learning foreign language is not the general rule. Most people give up or stop learning before they get very far. And if you're starting out to learn a language and you don't want that to happen to you, you'd like to improve your chances of success, then you should know that lots of my observation and other research as well indicates that in terms of seeing you through, leading you to greater chances of success, if you have personal or cultural affinity, integrative orientation, intellectual interest, you're more likely to succeed in learning the language than if you just have one of the first two kinds. So, a lesson that can be learned here right away, let's say you are, again, that normal learner, that you're learning a language because you have a need to do so, you can increase your chances of success if you consciously set out to try to develop, beyond your instrumental orientation, try to develop some integrative orientation. Listen to music from the language, read books or watch movies from it. If you can, go to a restaurant, develop a liking for the food, maybe get to know the people somehow if you're single and you can develop a relationship with somebody from the culture, that's always a great way to keep your motivation going. And if you have the inclination or the disposition to towards intellectual reasons, when we get to those at the end, if you could develop some of these as well, you would increase your chances for maintaining your motivation and increasing your chances of success. Moving on to motivation, considered as the specific goals that learners set and strive for. The first thing we have to consider is whether our goals are realistic or unrealistic. There's something to be said for aiming extremely high, having setting the bar as high as you can and trying to achieve the greatest things that you can, because even if you fall short, you'll get a lot higher than you would if you had not aimed so high to begin with. There is something to be said for that, but language learning is not something like, say, getting physically fit, where if you have truly unrealistic goals, if you try to do too much, too fast, too soon, you can really hurt yourself and damage your health. Having unrealistic language learning goals won't do that to you, but if you do set unrealistic goals, such as, I don't know, trying to become perfectly fluent within a very short period of time, within 6 months or a year, what is likely to happen to you is that as you realize you're not going to make your goal, you will get discouraged and lose your motivation altogether. So it is better to have realistic than unrealistic goals. And in terms of that, there are several different layers or levels of goals. The first one is long-term ultimate objectives. What do you hope to get? What do you hope to do ultimately? Do you want to pass yourself off as a native speaker? Or some people just say, I want to learn survival guerrilla level language. I don't want to get any more than that. I just want to go there and survive. My goals are often to just be able to read the literature in the language easily and fluidly. Things like this. What do you ultimately hope to do or achieve? This is the long-term objective area. And then the next level is what I call the midterm level, the one-time specific targets, the road markers, the mile markers, paths along the way, whether or not you are hoping to most often pass a certain standardized test by a certain time, get a certain score to prove your achievement, to get a certain grade, or to complete a certain language requirement if you are learning out of compulsion, or if you're aspiring to finish a certain book, a certain method within a certain amount of time. These are the kind of midterm markers or targets that people often set to sustain them. If they're aware a long-term goal is far off, if you set midterm goals, this will keep you striving towards them. But even better than that are the short-term recurring goals, or what I call the daily quota, or perhaps the weekly quota. And this is what you can really tick off. This is the slow and steady wins the race part. This is the step-by-step you're getting there part. And this is where you might say, I'm aiming to learn so many vocabulary words, or memorize so many characters, or listen to so many lessons, or learn a new lesson and revise so many lessons every day. This is the kind of thing where you can really mark your progress, and I think that this is the most important type of goal to have. And that said, referring back again to what I noted in the previous film, the rather sad fact that most people who set out to learn a foreign language don't really get anywhere with it. And on this level, considering motivation as goals, I would have to make the observation that this is certainly in part due to the fact that I have observed that many people only have what I would say a long-term, rather unrealistic objective to pass themselves off as a native speaker. That's probably just not going to happen ever, and it's very far away if it is, and many students don't have either the midterm targets to keep them on their way, or any sort of daily quota or short-term recurring goal that would get them going in that direction. So I think it's very important to focus on the shorter terms more than anything else here. Moving on to motivation, considered as propulsion, energy that drives language study forward. Obviously, the ideal would be, quite simply, to be passionately interested in your subject matter, to love it, to want to do it. Okay, but that might be a tall order. How can you just force that? It's a very hard thing to do. And often you don't have it. And if we look at specific issues that might be behind a lack of passion, behind this drive, problems in motivation considered as propulsion, I think that I can identify 6 basic categories for this. And these are, the first one I would call basically human nature is general inertia, procrastination, lack of discipline. This is when you, on a conscious level, these are all issues in lack of propulsion. These are all kind of psychological reasons. Given that you have a conscious decision that you want to learn a language, you have reasons for it, and maybe you have goals set, but if you have a hard time getting it done, again, the first one, you might have just general inertia. It might be that learning a language is on the top of your to-do list, and it's been there for a while, and it's just not getting done. Or maybe you have issues with procrastination. You might make active plans to do it. You might be actually collecting quite a number of methods and books for learning the language, and you might be excited when you get them and spend an afternoon looking through that new book when you get it, and every so often you take a Saturday afternoon and you go through them and you learn a little bit and you get more of an understanding of what's involved in the learning, but you tell yourself you need to start next break, next vacation, next time you can really get it going, and somehow that time never arrives. Or maybe, with more of a lack of discipline, you actually say, okay, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to set out and do it, and logically it would make sense to get some guidance, and so you begin by going online and looking at how to learn a language and trying to get some pointers, and you find a language learning forum where you get lots of good advice about how to go about learning a language, what good methods and materials are, and all sorts of issues involved in language learning. And maybe you spend a lot of time there thinking about it, planning about it, thinking about learning a language, but actually getting down and doing it, maybe because you spend so much time planning, you don't actually get down to it. The second level that I have here of issues and lack of passion is a step beyond that. And here I put negative experience or avoidance patterns or blocks of different kinds. And this is when we're not just, in the first case, I think that, yes, it is human nature. I think that most New Year's resolutions are not kept, and if you go to any gym, they'll tell you that they have 10 times more members than ever come, and if you go to a used instrument shop, you'll notice that most of the instruments are in relatively new and unused condition. It's normal to want to set out to do something new and perhaps not to get to do it. But on this second level, where you have a negative experience, here we're dealing with, in motivational theory, with the attributes theory of motivation, which says that if you have a past failure that you attribute to something in your characteristic, you're likely to want to avoid or not engage in that kind of behavior again. So this might not be a conscious level, but if you had a negative experience studying a foreign language before, if you tried to learn it and you didn't get anywhere and you were frustrated by it, that might be coming back to bite you again as you set out to do it. You might have some real fear and anxiety built up because of that. Under avoidance, when you get locked in a pattern of avoidance, even when you decide to break out, that's not an easy thing to do. And when it comes to learning foreign languages, there are circumstances under which I think people would agree that they should learn foreign languages. If you go to live in a foreign country, you should learn the language. But sometimes you go, and particularly as a native English speaker, it's easy for you not to do it right away, and maybe you didn't intend to stay there as long as you had, and you turn around and you've been there for years, and you say, oh, I really should learn this language now, but somehow by having not done it for a while, it's harder to do it than it might be otherwise. Likewise, there are certain professions, I think, most specifically of let's say applied linguistics. If you're so interested in how people learn languages, that you make that your career, theorizing about how people learn languages and observing, doing research on how other people learn languages, I think it's clear that you should practice what you preach and make sure you understand what you're talking about by engaging in it yourself. And yet most applied linguists don't go about learning that many foreign languages themselves, and when they would try to, they might sit down for, either with avoidance or anxiety or fear. You might sit down to actually study when you determine to do so, and you'll run up against a block similar to a writer's block. In case you don't know what that is, it's when you've been brainstorming, you have a lot of ideas, you think it's all going to flow out of you, and then you sit down to write and it just won't come. And so I think that you can recognize that you have sort of maybe some of these issues if when you do make the decision to sit down and finally study, and that same thing happens. Your brain just will not concentrate upon studying. You become hypersensitive instead to other sounds and sights, things that normally are really secondary, somehow seem extremely important. So you sit down to study and you twist and you fidget, and then you notice that your picture is hanging crooked, and so you get up to straighten it out. You notice it's dusty, you start dusting it off, then you have to clean up the dust, so you're vacuuming your room, and you sit down to study and you end up cleaning instead. That's one level. It can even be worse than that. Sometimes you, again, dealing with real fear and anxiety, your conscious mind gets you to the point when you sit down to actually study, but your unconscious mind then starts to panic and to tell you all sorts of things like, I can't do this, I cannot do this, I must stop. This can be a real issue. The third level, resistance to study. Maybe you're somebody who has a great deal of discipline and motivation, and you're easily able to set up and engage in regular physical exercise or musical practice or all sorts of other things. You have none of the problems I just described, but you don't like studying. You never like school. The whole idea that you have of studying, sitting down, that just doesn't appeal to you. I think you can still get over this in the same way that I'm going to describe for the first 5 of these. And you can also get over this, especially more and more in our current times, by expanding your notion of what it means to study, in particular study a foreign language. There are many methods that you can use, all audio methods that ease you into learning the language, that are not at all like sitting down and doing applied study. There are other methods where you can focus on the physicality of it or the musicality of it. So that's something to keep in mind there as well. Perhaps a little bit harder one might be the fourth one I have, resistance to foreign language learning. And this here is something that might be legitimate. However much those of us who love language learning, foreign languages, might be able to come up with good reasons for why people might want to learn a language. The simple fact of the matter is, the world as a whole, the world at large, doesn't particularly value or reward learning foreign languages, and in terms of sheer investment of time and energy, while it might be a good thing to have on your resume, and the same time it takes you to learn a language, you could learn other more profitable things. You also might say, I'm a scholar, I'm a mathematician or a scientist or a musician, and I like learning, but I just don't want to spend my time with languages. Then there's another level here where it might be, this is a deeper psychological level. There's a simple fact of the matter that learning a foreign language is, psychologically speaking, equivalent to reinventing the wheel. You have your native language, your mother language, that you dominate perfectly, and on some level you're bound to know, I'm never going to speak this foreign language as well. I'm always going to have problems and maybe sound silly and struggle with it, and that's a hard thing to force yourself to do. But if you have to, you have to. And again, I will have a tip in just a minute for how you can do that. An even harder one yet is resistance to the particular target language. Maybe you don't have a problem studying, you don't have a problem studying foreign languages, but you find yourself studying a particular foreign language and you don't like it. Maybe you tried to develop an integrative orientation and it backfired. You find out you don't like the food, you don't like the music or the books or the films, you don't like the people, but you have to learn the language. Here, I think it would be better ideally, if you didn't have to, if this were the case, if you could learn a different language, or if you could try to get over that. But again, if you have to, you have to. And I will recommend a general suggestion for how to put all of these motivational issues behind you in just a minute. But in regards to this specific one, I could also say that one thing you can do, because this is a bitter pill, I've been there, I know, is to, well, focus on sort of payback. It's not a very nice thing to do or to think about, but if you can sort of think of getting some revenge from using the language because you don't like it, if you can master it anyway and sort of bushwhack the people who speak it by pretending not to know it and then coming out knowing it well anyway, you can turn this to your advantage. But at any rate, these first 5 are things that I will talk about a way to overcome in just a minute. But looking at this list, going to the 6th one, needs a different tactic, and that is loss of motivation due to lack of progress. That's a totally different issue altogether. When you have been motivated, and the reason your motivation is going away is because you feel like you are not making progress. But for these first 5, what's the cure for most of the motivational issues, 1 through 5? I think it is habit. Getting into the habit of doing something makes motivational issues in doing it go away. When I speak from personal experience in this, and when I tell people about this, it might sound simplistic, or if they're in the know about educational theory and psychology, sometimes they look back at me and say, my God, that's so behavioristic. And either leave it at that or further articulate, don't you know that behaviorism is passé, outmoded, discredited as an educational, pedagogical theory? That it doesn't work? Well, no, I don't know that. I know the contrary. I know that it works extremely well for me. I know that I myself, I don't have to motivate myself to learn foreign languages. I'm on permanent automatic pilot there, but I do have to motivate myself occasionally to do certain other things, physical exercise, practice my musical instruments, that I have. These are things that I have done for most of my life, but I fall out of the habit of doing, and I need to get back into the habit. And so I know that habit formation is a hard thing to do. To really get into the habit, on the one hand, requires overcoming perhaps any psychological issues that we just looked at in lack of propulsion. But beyond that, it requires restructuring your use of time. Perhaps you have some unproductive time habits that you can sacrifice relatively easily, but even that, getting out of those habits and substituting more profitable habits, that can be a challenge. And you might just be too busy to integrate some new demanding habit, like studying a language. And it requires not just reorganizing your time, but perhaps your life as a whole. If you have a busy family or social or professional life, finding a way and a time to integrate a new habit, this can be a challenge as well. So habit formation, from my experience, is a hard thing. It has, as I wrote here, it requires a variable degree of momentum that must be maintained until the habit is fixed or automatized. And what does that mean? If you've never engaged in this kind of thing before, if you haven't tried it, you might not know. But if you have tried, like I have, sometimes you make the good resolution to start doing something regularly, playing a flute, working out, studying a language, be it as the case may be. And the first day is relatively easy. You wake up full of enthusiasm and you go right at it. And maybe the second day as well. The third day you're sore or tired, but you manage it anyway. It's really the fourth or the fifth day that you're likely to put it off. And if you do, then you're very likely to put it off again the next day, and then you're back to where you started. Habit formation requires, how can I make an analogy? It's like flying a kite. In order to get into the habit, you have to fly your kite. You have to get it up to a certain altitude at a certain wind speed. And it doesn't matter how close you get. If you don't get there, it'll fall back down and you have to start all over again. And it's that way with habit formation. You can't know ahead of time how much momentum you need, but let's say it would take you 15 days to get fixed in a habit. If you do it for 14 days but then fail on the 15th day, yes, you might have to start all over again. Certainly if you only do it for a couple of days, you'll have to start and start and start over again. And as I just said, you can't know the degree of momentum. Again, speaking from my personal experience, exercising is something that I have done pretty regularly throughout my entire adult life, sort of my part of my self-definition. I think of myself as a long-distance runner. For my entire adult life, I've gotten up early and gone for a run pretty much every single day. But every so often, I am pushed or I fall out of that habit. I might injure myself, have a bad bicycle accident, scrape up my whole left side, or fall and twist my ankle, and I just can't do it for 6 months, 6 weeks or 2 months at a time. Or I might get sick on top of that, or move to a new location where it's hard to find a good place to do it, and in some way, shape, or form, I'll get out of the habit for about 2 months, say. And when you're in the habit of doing something like getting up and going for a run every morning, it's hard not to do that. You wake up and it's time for you to go, and so the fact that it's raining and cold and dark, it's a moot point. You just do it. Whereas if you're not in the habit, those are very significant. They're going to contribute to keeping you in bed and not getting up and doing that. So for me, getting back into the habit of exercising when I've fallen out of it, that might just be a question of a week or 10 days. I might have several false starts, but if I can keep it up every day for a week or 10 days, then I can get back into the habit. And once you've done it regularly, again, when you're doing it regularly, then you can start to be a bit more flexible. Then you can take a day off if you need or want to, and it won't bring the whole thing crashing down. But until you get that habit fixed, it will. You need to keep it sustained without break. Playing a musical instrument, that's something. Playing the flute or various instruments in the flute family, that's something I've done since I was a child. But that is something that I have stopped doing at various points for not just weeks or months at a time, but even years at a time. And when I've tried to start up again, it takes me more, if it takes me a week or 10 days to get into the habit of exercising again after I've broken that, it takes me a lot longer to get back into the habit of playing my flutes every day. But it can be done. I've done it. Doing it right now, as a matter of fact. So for you, if you've never been in the habit of studying every day, it's going to take a lot longer. It'll take a month or months in order to really get that habit fixed. And what habit is that? That's the study habit, the habit of studying on a regular, systematic, structured, daily basis with a specific routine. How can you do that? Here's how. Here's how I go about it when I've had to, again, get back into some of my habits or get through graduate school, all sorts of things like that. Conscious habit formation. What do you need? Nike has a very good slogan. If you want to do it, just do it. You have to get started. You have to do it. So how do you do it? What do you need? You need these things. The first thing you need is a start date. It's important, psychologically speaking, to have some preparation and planning. Sometimes it's good to just throw yourself into it. If you have some particular experience, you want to jump start it right away, that's good. If you, as a matter of fact, if you're somebody who knows a lot about this, you have all these elements in place already, and you have thought about this, and hearing me talk about it really gets you motivated to do it, then I challenge you to do it right now, today, because as you know, tomorrow never comes. There's always tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. But if this is newer to you, yes, having a start date, setting it, getting all the other elements in place, and getting yourself psyched up is important. I take New Year's resolutions very seriously, and because that only comes around once a year, you don't want to wait that long. The beginning of a month is always a good time for me, some specific date that you're going to get started and start doing something new. You also need, particularly for studying language, you need a quiet time and place, somewhere where you can say, I'm going to do this at the same time every day, and I'm going to do it in the same place every day, and I'm not going to be disturbed, and I'm not going to disturb other people by doing this. So I recognize not everybody is a morning person, but I do think the time that lends itself to this most easily is if you can manage to get up a little bit earlier, up earlier than anybody you are living with, and make this your time for doing it. You have more control over that than you do, say, at the end of the day. You never know what's going to come up. And a place where you won't be disturbed. Simplest and easiest solution is if you can push a small desk or table into a corner, a blank corner, where you're not going to have anything in front of you that's going to disturb you or distract you. The third thing that you need is what I call dedicated study materials. And by this I mean things that are not multitasking. There are so many really good ways of learning languages that you can get online, to the internet and the computer. There are many applications that you can put in an iPod or other things like this that you can really do spaced interval repetition and all sorts of other good programs that you probably can and should explore once you're into the study habit. But in particular, if you're not in the habit and you are in the habit of doing all sorts of other things on a multitasking tool, you're going to have a very hard time getting started, established in a new habit, something like studying a language. So I would recommend avoiding those initially and going for some more old-fashioned dedicated study materials, such as a book or a manual, a textbook devoted entirely to the language, paper, pencil, notebook for writing in, maybe some paper flashcards, certainly CDs for learning and listening to the material, stuff that's only designed for language learning. And you also need, going back to the goal theory, to have some idea how you're going to use them, some quota plan for your use. Again, if you're going to start out by trying to, I don't know, memorize Chinese characters, say I'm going to do 10 or 15 or however many a day and modify that as you go, but have some plan for what you're going to do. Because it can be overwhelming when you're starting out on a new endeavor, and particularly overwhelming in the fourth consideration in terms of the time. I think you probably know that learning a language is basically a lifetime commitment. It's going to take a long time to get anywhere to master, and that is truly overwhelming if you haven't done it before and you're just going to start out throwing yourself into the big ocean of language learning. So I think it's very important that you set a time limit. And I wrote here, my first suggestion would be to say, let me do 15 minutes at a time for 1 month or 30 days, whichever comes first, depending on when you're starting. I recommend this, 15 minutes. That's a small, manageable time when you can say, I'm just going to sit down at my desk here with my book for learning the language, and I'm not going to do anything else. 15 minutes is manageable. I'm not going to allow myself to get up and straighten out my picture or do anything else. I either have to sit down and study, or I just have to sit down and wait till 15 minutes is over. And I'm going to do this every day for a month, and I'll see how it goes. And after that, I will modify it. I'll either stop if I say that I really don't like it, I'm getting nowhere, this is not for me, or I recommend 15 minutes as a manageable time limit too. When it comes to actually learning new information, it's better to have shorter, intensive bursts of study than long, protracted bursts of study. So if it works, you might want to say, I'm going to sit down and study for 15 minutes. And it works. After 15 minutes, stop. Make yourself stop before you get tired, before you lose your focus. Stop. You can get up, you can stretch, drink a glass of water, go to the bathroom, and then if you want to, you can sit right down, or you can do something else and come back and do another 15 minutes later on. After a month, you might want to increase this to 20, 25 minutes. You don't want to go over half an hour for learning new materials. 15 minutes in and of itself, if you can manage to do 15 minutes each and every single day, you will make progress eventually, but it'll be quite slow. You need to put in much more time than this ultimately to make faster, rapid progress, but this is also something that will get you somewhere. So to have a time limit, I think, is extremely important for easing yourself into a habit of doing something. You'll also need some physical things with you. You'll need a stopwatch for measuring your time, making sure you don't go over your limit, and if you're not doing it, for looking at the seconds go by and building up your focus and concentration in that fashion, and marking your time. Marking things down, yes, presuming that you get your quota done, you manage to get your 15 minutes in, you need to keep a language learning log, a schedule to see what you've accomplished. And later on, you can do this in various other forms, but initially, you should do this in the form of a calendar, and I mean a big wall calendar. You might have to make it yourself. It's hard to find one that's big enough, but you want to get a calendar that is large enough that you can mark it, write down on it, cross out each day as you do it, and indicate what you've done. And then this is going to be something that stares you right in the face. And as I said, getting the first 3 or 4 days of a resolution down is not so hard, but after that, other things start to get in your way, and perhaps you can overcome those. And once you've got a couple of weeks under your belt, if you can see that graphically in front of you, if you have any temptation or hindrance stopping you on a given day, looking up at that and saying, I've managed it this far, do I want to mess up today? That can push you on, keep you going until you are set in the habit. And then the mirror. What do you need a mirror for? Well, the same way the calendar is going to stare you in the face, the mirror is so you can stare yourself in the face. You'll need this in particular if you find yourself, instead of studying, making excuses. Basically, if you find yourself talking yourself out of it, telling yourself that you can't do this, I want you to look in yourself in the face as you do that. I think it's a sad fact, or maybe a normal fact. It's so much easier to lie to ourselves than it is to lie to other people. There's no consequences, nobody to confront you with it. So having a mirror, looking yourself in the face, looking at yourself as if you were somebody else, and watching yourself tell yourself, I can't do this. I don't have the time to do this. Look at yourself in the face as you say that and see if you think that you're really telling the truth. Try to refute yourself. Try to talk yourself out of this. This is a very good tactic for sort of combating a minor panic attack or lack of confidence. It might seem strange, a little bit crazy to talk to yourself in the mirror, but don't forget you're supposed to be in a quiet time and place where you're all by yourself. Talking to yourself in a mirror is also very good practice for when you're actually practicing the language, speaking it, making sure that you're articulating fully. And although it's a little bit strange, what's crazier? Using a technique that works well and gets you to do what you say you want to do, or allowing yourself to be weak-willed and talk yourself out of doing what you really want to do. So you might need these things. You might also want to have, what I put on line number 6, you might want to turn to some other people for various reasons. I'm going under the presupposition that you're going to be engaging in self-study here, or just trying to get your homework done if you're already taking a class. So certainly you could take a class or have a teacher or somebody else there with you, but if you're on your own, you could still turn to other people, in particular for inspiration. Just if you have doubts, learning a language is a long, hard process, and you might think, I can't do this, is it possible? Well, look around. In this day and age, this same venue where you're finding my video, you will find many other videos. There's a good half dozen, maybe a dozen other people out there making videos about language learning, their experience about language learning, and I hope you find my videos inspirational as well as just good for their information, but I recognize there's all sorts of different kinds of people out there, and I'm rather academic and bookish and formal and getting old, or at least old-fashioned, and you might want to find somebody who's a bit more geared towards conversation or energetic in a different fashion. Yes, look around in this same venue and you'll find lots of inspiration of other enthusiastic language learners. You might want to, depending on your personality, if you have a study buddy, as it were, look to somebody else for some companionship, the same way some people find it easier to go for a run or go to the gym if they have somebody else to answer to and go along. You might want to look into that if you need it. And finally, you might want to turn to others for confirmation, I put here. What I mean by that is ultimately, you have to, talking about self-discipline here, it's up to you to get yourself going, but you might want to rely upon the technique, the tactic of telling others what you're trying to do, at asking them to check up on you and keep you up on that. Tell your colleagues, tell your family, tell your friends, I'm trying to start learning a language every day as a habit, and I really want to do this, but it's hard, I know that, so can you please ask me about it? Please make sure that I don't slack off. You can ask people to do that or check up on you. And finally, another thing you can do is, if you need to take this final step, you can set up a system of rewards or penalties, as the case may be. A lot of things that I've looked at in terms of sort of self-help or motivation, getting you started, recommend, well, letting yourself indulge yourself in something when you go ahead and do what you say you're going to do. And that might work. That might be a good idea if you do deny yourself something that you like, if you give yourself that as a reward for carrying through. I certainly think that when I'm dealing with other people, it's much better to use positive feedback. With my sons, trying to get them to do something that I want them to do, but they don't necessarily want to do. When you get right down to it, bribery is the best, most effective thing. I know you don't want to do this, but do it and I'll buy you a toy. Okay, then they'll do it. With yourself, though, because we're dealing with self-discipline, and I think it's easy, as I said, it's easy to lie to yourself. It's easy to be too indulgent to yourself. So when I'm dealing with myself, I find it easier to set up a system of what I have to call penalties, which sounds awful, but basically I just mean making it consequential, making there be a penalty for failure to carry through with your resolve. And the best way to do this is, yes, a fine, a financial fine. Don't just tell your colleagues, don't just tell your friends who like you to check up on you and make you do it. Tell some colleague that you don't particularly like, who doesn't particularly like you, hey, every day that I don't do this, I'm going to give you a certain amount of money. I have to pay you $10 a day or 10 euros a day or whatever every day for a month if I don't do this. And you should make that not painful but consequential, so that you'll feel it. Don't just make it a token penalty, but something that you would really push you to try to avoid. I think that the combination of these things should be enough to get you started if you have the resolve, the conscious desire to want to learn a language. But as I indicated above with habit formation, it's not just a question of overcoming psychological habits, other habits of not doing something, and so you get into the habit of doing something. There's a time constraint and there's a lifestyle constraint. And so I think while it would be best if you could manage to do this in your own normal lifetime situation, it might be easier, it might be better if there was some sort of special venue, some sort of special place that you could do this. If you could, say, go away on vacation, develop a habit on vacation, and then come back, it would be easier. You might fall out of it initially, but then it would be a question of getting back into it rather than just getting into it. So as a truly special venue, if you are a regular viewer or subscriber to mine, if you haven't seen it, if you go to my website, if you look at the page that I have for an institute, I have a vision for a place that would be quite like this. It doesn't exist yet, but it would be a place where you would go and you'd learn language study skills, and you would get the encouragement and the support that you needed to do this. And I think that if you could successfully really establish a habit somewhere else and then go back, it would be a lot easier to maintain it perhaps than trying to set it up on your own. So you might want to have a look at that. Moving on to the other set of motivation, what habit won't do. There's no point in continuing. When you have a habit, you can go on, and once you get into the habit, the whole point is not to just plog ahead like a robot or an automaton, but if you're in the habit, if you are doing something every day, if you overcome any sort of psychological reasons you have for not wanting to be doing what you have to or consciously want to do, then what should happen is, if you work every day in an intelligent, systematic fashion, you will make progress. And then progress becomes its own motivation. You keep making progress. You're learning. That will drive you on. That will drive you forward. That's what happens to me. Well, it always happens to me with languages. That's what happens to me when I play my flutes on a regular basis, when I work out or run or do something else on a regular basis. You get better and better and better, and you want to keep getting better and better and better. However, with language learning in particular, you can lose your motivation because you can stop making progress. Maybe you never made any to begin with, that would be terrible, but what really happens, what really stops a lot of people, makes people give up on language learning, is that they do make progress for a while and then they feel like they're not making any more progress. So what cures are there? Just forcing yourself to keep going by habit is not going to do it. The first cure is to understand that there are what are called learning curves and plateaus, and that these are natural and normal and to be expected. And the fact that you stop making progress doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It's something that you should actually expect and be prepared for. You need to know, however hard it is for you to start learning a language, when you get right down to it, the beginning is the easiest part. Going from absolutely no knowledge to some knowledge, that's relatively easy. But once you've got the basics down, to build upon that and to get more substantial, that's a much longer process, a much harder process in many ways. And you need to know that and understand that. And perhaps you don't, or perhaps you've heard that, but again, I myself, particularly with exercise, I've heard, I understand on some level that you can't do the same thing every day and continue to make progress. You start out doing one set of exercises, and then your body becomes accustomed to that, and it's not as effective anymore. Learning languages is perhaps the same way. So apart from understanding that, the second thing you could do is you could say, well, perhaps I just need to change my materials or change my methods. That's always a good tactic. That might do it if you're not at a plateau, but you've just been doing the same kind of thing. Doing something else or doing something in a different way can certainly help you start making progress again. But if you are at a plateau, then what you might want to consider doing is the third thing here. You might want to pause for what I call activation. That is, presuming that you've gotten to at least a relatively intermediate level, you might want to, and you've just been studying by yourself, sort of with study materials, didactic materials, books and recordings or computer programs or something like that, and you come to a point when you say, I'm not making any more progress, I've learned a lot, but now I'm not learning anything more, then it might be time to, so you don't break your study habit, use the same study time to activate your language. Put it to a test. See how much you really learned by, earlier I said initially you should probably not use computerized type programs. At this point, if you haven't been using it, you should. You should go online, you should go to a language exchange and try to get a conversation partner that you can work with online if you don't have access to real live people. And in other ways like that, try to use your language. See how much you know, and you might, well, you'll probably find one of either two things. You actually know a lot, you know enough, and you can have it grow from this point without doing any more study. That would be the ideal. Or, rather than feeling blocked like you're not making any progress, you would know exactly where your weaknesses are, what you need to focus on, and you could go at it more strongly from that perspective. If for any reason you can't or you don't want to, or activating it doesn't work for you, another option you have is to pause in your study of one language in order to study another language. If you are, again, a practically goal-oriented person who's learning a language for instrumental reasons, you need to learn this particular language by a certain date, then you don't want to do this for a long time. You just want to do this for a very short time, say a week, to give yourself some perspective. If you've been studying Spanish and you get to a feeling where you're not making any more progress, well, stop for a week and get some books, go to the library and get some books for studying, I don't know, say Italian. And the first thing you'll notice is, however hard it was for you to learn Spanish at first, you're able to transfer a lot. You know a lot of Italian right away. But then, when you look at the more advanced lessons, you realize, hey, I can't read this. It's much easier for me to read Spanish than it is for me to read and understand these lessons. This degree of perspective might help you see that you have made a lot of progress and know where you need to go for that. Whereas if you're not so practically oriented in your learning, you might want to do this for a little bit longer time. To learn several languages in a comparative context actually makes them easier to learn ultimately. So if you study another language, similar, related language for a while, and then you go back to the original language, you'll find that you have actually, incidentally, continued learning it while you studied its relative. So these are some cures for suggestions of making lack of progress. And now, finally, moving on to what I promised at the beginning, to a consideration of some of the types of intellectual motivation that you might want to consider. These aren't things that I think occur to a lot of people normally and naturally. So as I said, if you do have that basic, normal, natural instrumental orientation and you try to increase your chances of success by building in other forms of motivation, yes, try to get some personal affinity going, but maybe try to understand some of these things as well. These kinds of intellectual motivation are, these are the reasons that I have studied languages myself. I think only the first 3 languages that I studied, French, German, and Spanish, fall into the first 3 categories that we initially looked at. I started learning French. It wasn't my choice. I was in junior high school, and they just started teaching it to me. I rebelled for a while, but I eventually came to internalize it and love learning the language. And to me now, it's the gosh, taking French away would blind me more than anything else that I can imagine doing. Not having it is rather unthinkable. German, the second language, I had a great deal of cultural affinity with it. I love German literature and German philosophy and this kind of thing, and I wanted to learn German as soon as I had the choice. Spanish, too. I liked a lot of Spanish authors, but there was also an element of practicality there, I suppose. I chose to teach myself Spanish as an exercise because I did live in a place where there are a lot of Spanish speakers, and I thought I could use it. Spanish and German, incidentally, I think had no conscious motivation for me, but they are my heritage languages. Half my blood is from the British Isles and a quarter each from Germany and Spain, ultimately. And these are 2 languages that I didn't know, so those were there for those reasons. But every other language that I've learned now, and I love learning languages so much, I've made it my career and my profession, it's out of my passion. I've studied, I don't know how many languages now, dozens or scores of languages to various degrees, and they've all been for reasons like these. The first type, maybe the first 3, I think, are going to be more generally comprehensible. The first type is cultural orientation and contextualization. This is when you study a language without a degree of personal affinity, but maybe out of respect for it, what it is, what it stands for. A lot of people study, in particular, classical languages, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, maybe Arabic, classical Chinese, languages that you know are important. You respect, where's my T in orientation? You know that these languages are important, and you want to learn them for that reason, for what they give you your understanding of culture. Other people like to learn languages for what I call the second reason here, because of philology and linguistics. There are people, if you're not one, this might be hard for you to believe, but there are people who just find languages in and of themselves interesting. They're fascinating objects of study, seeing how they work, how they relate to each other. These are things that some people find interesting. So studying languages out of philological reasons is another type of intellectual motivation. A third type is for mental exercise. I think that continuing to learn throughout your life, lifelong learning is a buzzword these days, but I value it very much. I think it's true. I think that continuing to learn lots of things, many different types of things, is very valuable, very important for keeping your mind flexible and alive and growing, keeping it fit, as it were. But I think that there is particular value to studying languages because languages, well, I at least, unless I'm totally different from a lot of other people, I think lots of people, we think in languages, we think through languages. And so learning a new way of thinking is particularly strong way, particularly valuable way of keeping your mind flexible. And because we think in and through languages, languages are something that you can learn themselves as objects, but then once you've learned it, you can do all sorts of other things. You can study all sorts of other things, read all sorts of other things, experience all sorts of other things through the language. So I think that learning languages is a particularly valuable form of mental exercise. As I said, I think that these three are reasons that other people could come up with. I've heard others talk about these things, but these last four are maybe more particular reasons, reasons that I've learned languages. The first one I call a vocabulary expansion. And what do I mean by this? I mean that I've always loved learning new words. I've always cherished that more than anything else. When I was a child, I remember being an adolescent, reading books where there were words in English that I didn't know, and I'd look them up, and I just found that so magical that there would be a particular word for a particular concept or a particular idea. I've always loved learning new words. And I think, though, that I've heard, I'm sure other languages also make this claim, but that English has one of the richest vocabularies, something like maybe 500,000 words in the Oxford English Dictionary. But there comes a point when you can't learn or use any more words. I'm going to throw out some round figures here that are debatable, but I think they're good basic ballpark figures. There's only about 5,000 words that are in the range of everyday vocabulary, and maybe 10,000 words that are in the range of sort of educated intellectual conversation, and maybe about 20,000 words that are commonly used even in writing and literature. And so if 20,000 words is sort of a norm of an extensive vocabulary, well, perhaps you can learn 25,000 or 30,000 words, but there comes a point when, you just can't use them, or other people won't understand you. You sound too pretentious using all these big words. You have to hold yourself back from using the full range of your vocabulary. And if you did use it, yes, they just wouldn't understand you. And because you can't use them, it's hard to retain them. So because I cherish learning new words so much, I've always loved learning foreign languages, because you can keep learning whole other sets of new words. Looking and the words, the way that the things that they describe, they present things in different concepts. Each language has a way of using words that's unique to it, and you can't translate necessarily from one language to another. So continuing to learn languages, learning foreign language, is a great way of continuing to expand your vocabulary if you happen to have gotten to basically a full point in your native language. Another reason that I've had for learning languages is I come from what I would call a monolingual prison, a monolingual environment, and I understand that it's probably more normal for people to be naturally bilingual or multilingual, but even so, most people only know one or two, maybe three languages from their environment, and yet if you look around the world, you see that there are environments where people learn more than that, 5, 6 languages, okay? So anybody can know and use 6 languages, and that's basic normal potential. So if that's something that can be done for you to only use one, and if you know that languages are the things through which we think, and they have words that express things that we can't express if we don't know these words, to not know them is, I've always found it kind of intolerable. It's always frustrated me when I hear people talking a language around me, and I have no idea what they're saying, and I don't even know what language it is. That bothers me. I want to know what the language is, and try to understand it as well. It's just as a basic means of saying it's possible to know many more. Let me do it. Let me not be limited, but let me expand my potential. And then a 6th reason that I have put here as a type of intellectual motivation for me is because we think through languages, basically we think through our native language, and we have no choice in that. We're programmed in it. We're programmed in the way that we think. And existentially speaking, when you look around and realize that there are other things out there, I have always just found it extremely philosophically, existentially exhilarating and almost liberating to think in other languages. I mean, there's nothing special about thinking in German if you are German, but if you're American, when you're thinking in German, I just find that to give me a degree of existential choice of my operating system, my programming system, that I find very meaningful. Likewise, and similarly, or growing out of that, is the seventh reason that I put down, type of intellectual motivation for learning foreign languages, is that when you can choose your programming, you can also have an existential choice of cultural currents. Just as you are born into the environment of a certain native language that chooses you and programs you for it, you're born into a certain place and time, and that language produces certain cultural products. And these are the ones that are all around you, the ones that you can pick up most naturally and normally, the ones that people around you are using. But you become aware that there are other cultural currents and other places and times, and you can get out in the world and go live in them, literally, by going and living in foreign countries and foreign cultures, but you can also do this at the same time or independently of that by when you get to the degree of choosing your programming, and you can essentially master a language, at least reading its literature, and you can immerse yourself entirely and fully in its products and its currents of thought. You can sort of really choose to immerse yourself in a totally different cultural environment from the one that has been sort of randomly given to you. So these are my types of intellectual motivation, and with that I see I've gone over an hour. I will certainly stop now, but I will make some additional video lectures talking about some of the themes that just got touched upon in this one.